Welcome! In this video, I'll introduce you to the new client-centric layout that's available starting in AIMS version 1.73. Before I give you a tour of this new layout, I want to explain the reasons we made this change. The first is that the client-centric layout is needed to support a new involvement type, diversion, which will be available in a future release. Secondly, the client-centric layout helps you manage client data and involvement data in a more intuitive way. To illustrate this, let me show you how AIMS used to look. Previously, AIMS had more of an involvement-centric layout, where the main view that you see here is the involvement view. I've got some client data pages at the top, and I've got some activity pages on the bottom with this involvement selector in between. If the client has more than one involvement like this client does, you had to go to the involvement selector to switch between them. So if I wanted to see this client's hearings, I could go to the hearings page, but I would only see hearings for the client's pretrial involvement. If I wanted to see the client's other hearings for their specialty court involvement, I would have to switch to it first before I could see them. The same thing goes for things like documents and other items in this navigation pane. If I want to see the data for the client as a whole, I have to first hunt things down by switching to the different involvements. This was not the best way to manage data in the long run, and it could get confusing to understand how all this data tied back to the person, the client. Because you can only view data for one involvement at a time, it was difficult to get a broad picture of a client's overall activity if they had multiple involvements. And as new involvement types like diversion become available in AIMS, you may find that your agency begins using more than one involvement type. So to help manage all this data better, we moved from that involvement-centric layout to this new client-centric layout where data is centralized around the client rather than one of their involvements. What you're looking at right now is called the client view, and this replaces the involvement view I showed you earlier. This client view lets you see everything that's going on with the client and all of their involvements from one spot, without having to toggle between involvements like we saw earlier. Yet you can still differentiate between involvements if you want to. So let's break down what's on the client view. You'll see the client photo that you're used to seeing, where you can upload or change the client's mugshot. You'll also see a star icon where you can add this client to your starred clients list on the home page. The starred involvements list is now called the starred clients list, and you can add clients there for quick access. At the top is a client tab and an involvement tab for each of the client's involvements. And you can see this client has both a pretrial and a specialty court involvement. I'm showing you the client view for a client with multiple involvements first, and then I'll show you an example of a client who just has one involvement. Let's look at the Client tab since this is new to the Client view. The Client tab serves two main functions. It stores all the client data like the demographic info and criminal history, and it stores what you can think of as a consolidated view of all the data from each of the client's involvements. Let's walk through the pages on the Client tab. The first page you're seeing is the overview. This shows you an entire overview of the client and all of their involvements. We have an involvement history card that lists each involvement, including closed ones. Here, there's a community service involvement that is closed, and if I want to view details about it, I can click on the link, and that will open up a new involvement tab for community service, where I can view involvement data. To remove this involvement from view, I click the X. You'll notice that these other tabs do not have X's. That's because these are currently open involvements, and we want these to be visible at all times. From the involvement history card, I can also add a new involvement, and the wizard automatically fills in the client's info for convenience. A big feature we think you'll love is this new client-based activities calendar. Unlike the main AIMS calendar, which shows events for all clients in the agency, this calendar only shows events for this client. This is particularly helpful if you work with clients who have multiple involvement types like this client does. Let's say that I'm responsible for his pretrial involvement, and I want to schedule him for a pretrial hearing. I can check out this calendar and see he's already got some specialty court hearings scheduled, and I don't want to double book him. So this calendar gives me a consolidated view of all the events for this client across all of his involvements. At this time, we cannot schedule events directly from this calendar, but we may be able to support that in a future release. Moving on is the Client Info section. This section is only available from this Client tab. You're not going to see it on the involvement tabs because client data stays with the client. It applies regardless of which involvements the client has. So personal info, contact info, and so on is all nested here under Client Info, and it's only available on the Client tab. We haven't made any changes to these pages except for this military page. In previous versions of AIMS, we only allowed one military service entry. With this release, we now allow multiple entries to account for different branches of service or different service dates. And in the dialog, you'll see additional fields to capture more details about the military service. Moving on, we have the criminal history section. And again, because criminal history follows the client, it's only available from this Client tab. The rest of this navigation pane features pages that consolidate data from all of the client's involvements. For example, if I want to go to the client's hearings page, the Client tab gives me a list of hearings from both of the client's involvements. I've got the specialty court hearings here and a pretrial hearing. Again, this is helpful if you're an officer that is servicing clients with multiple involvement types, because you can see what the client is scheduled for across the board. Notice there is a new involvement column here to make it clear which involvement items pertain to. The involvement type is listed along with the involvement ID number. If I want to filter this page, for example, if I just want to see pretrial hearings, I can do that, but by default, the page shows everything. This view continues for each of the other pages in the navigation pane. There are some good use cases where this will benefit clients with multiple involvements. For example, electronic monitoring. Let's say again that I'm responsible for servicing this client's pretrial involvement, and the judge orders him to wear an ankle bracelet and have an interlock installed in his car. I can come to this page and see that the client already has an interlock device from his specialty court involvement, and it's for the same dates that the judge wants it for pretrial. I don't need to add another one, he's already got one. So I can just add the monitoring order for the ankle bracelet. Notice here that I have to select which involvement the monitoring order applies to. Because the Client tab includes all involvement data, whenever I schedule or add something from this tab, I need to tell AIMS which of the client's involvements the item pertains to. Moving on, you'll notice that treatment and education is now nested under supervision. It used to be its own standalone item in this list, but now you'll find it under supervision. We've also renamed treatment and education programs to treatment and education services, and that's reflected throughout the UI. For example, program enrollment is now called service enrollment. This change is in preparation for the new diversion involvement type, which holds a different meaning for the word program. Another benefit to this Client tab is in accounting. We can see this client has financial obligations from their old community service involvement and from their current pretrial and specialty court involvements. It's much more helpful to the client if you can generate a single financial statement that shows all of these fees and gives them a full picture of what they owe. Another area to note is the Notes page. We can now see notes from all of the client's involvements on this one page, and I now have the ability to add a general client note that is not related to our particular activity or involvement. For example, if a client notifies me that they changed their address and I updated it in the system, I can leave a general note here and make the note available to everybody. I want to call out that permissions are still honored with this client-centric layout. As I've been navigating these pages, it's with the assumption that I have permissions to access both pretrial and specialty court data. If I were only permitted to access pretrial data and not permitted to even view specialty court data, I would not see it here. I would not see the specialty court tab, and I wouldn't see specialty court data in any of these pages. You'll also see the activity log now consolidates activity from all of the involvements. We've also added what's called deep linking. Here I can see a form was uploaded to the Documents page. In the past, if I clicked on this link, it took me to the Documents page, but it was difficult to tell that the entire page was being filtered to show just that document. We've increased visibility by adding this orange badge here that lets you know the page is being filtered to display just that document. If you want to see everything, click the X to remove the filter. We've gone over what things look like on the Client tab, and now let me show you how things look on the Involvement tabs. Each Involvement tab will only show the data that pertains to that particular involvement. So on this Pretrial tab, we can expect to only see pretrial data. This overview page now shows the involvement overview that you're used to seeing, so you can see the overall status of the pretrial involvement. Note that the client info pages and criminal history pages are no longer accessible on an Involvement tab, because that information is tied to the client and only appears on the Client tab. The rest of the activity pages will also only show data for pretrial. So if I go to the Hearings page, I'll only see pretrial hearings. If I go up to this filter, I can see that it's automatically enabled and that it's all grayed out. This is a visual indicator that we are just looking at pretrial data. If I want to see all hearings, I'm given a tooltip that lets me know I need to go to the Client tab to see hearings for all involvements. In general, you can think of this entire client view as the storage place for all client and involvement data, and each involvement tab acts as a big filter on that client view to only show data for that particular involvement. From here, if I were to schedule a hearing, I no longer have to select which involvement it applies to. It's pre-selected for me because I'm already on that pretrial tab. So as a user, you can choose whether you want to schedule activities from the Client tab, where you'll have to choose an involvement, or you can schedule them from the Involvement tab, where it's pre-selected for you. I also want to call out that the items that show up on this left navigation pane are specific to that involvement type. For example, investigations are unique to pretrial. They don't exist in specialty court or community service involvements. So if you want to access investigations, you need to come to the pretrial tab to do so. You won't see the investigations option on the Client tab. The same is true for infractions and violations, which you can only access from the pretrial tab because they only exist in pretrial. Hopping over to the Specialty Court tab, the overview page here shows me the overall status of the specialty court involvement, and you'll see here that the navigation pane has changed again to only show items that pertain to specialty court. So if I want to access surveys and goals, for example, I need to come to this tab because those things are only available in specialty court. So now that you've seen how the client view looks for a client with multiple involvement types, let's see how it looks for a client with only one involvement type. The main benefit of the client view in this case is preserving the history of the involvements, particularly closed involvements, so that you can still access that data easily. Even though this client only has specialty court data, I can see in the involvement history that they had a prior specialty court involvement and they were terminated. So if I want to, I can still view the information from that involvement. The Client tab will show me info from both of those involvements as well. For example, the Documents page shows me both documents relating to their involvement with ID ending in 301 and documents from the involvement with ID ending in 1001. That wraps up the client view, and now I'll show you other areas of the application that also reflect a client-centric layout. On the home page, you'll see the Starred Involvements list is now called the Starred Clients list, and if you click on a client's name, you're taken directly to their client view on the Client tab. You'll also see that the involvement cards show links for clients now instead of involvements. On the main menu, the Involvements option now says Clients, and we have a new sub-option here called the All list. This gives you a full list of all clients in your agency regardless of what involvement they have. If I click on a client's name, I'm taken directly to the Client view on the Client tab. If I click on an involvement link, I'm taken to the Client view on the Involvement tab. You can still access the client list views for particular involvement types by selecting the involvement type from the menu. You'll then see the list of clients with that involvement type and the tabs up top that represent the workflow for that involvement type. Now you know how to get around the new client-centric layout in AIMS. Thanks for watching.